First of all, I just want to say thank you again to everyone for being here. Thank you, Jessica, for joining us in this virtual space. I'm super excited to get to talk to you about your book, Savage Pageant. I'm kind of obsessed with it. So this is one of those great things that I love about this job, is being able to talk to different authors that I've admired and been reading heavily during this pandemic time. So it should be an exciting conversation. Everyone listening, if you have questions as our conversation goes on, please put them in the chat. I'll try to do my best to kind of navigate between screens there so that we can get to everyone's questions, and we'll have some time at the end as well to cover those. But for those of you who are tuning in to these events for the first time, just a little bit about who we are. My name's Emily Holland. I'm the managing editor of Poet Lore, which is America's oldest poetry magazine. Our newest issue is right here on the shelf behind me. I publish 2 issues a year through our publisher, the Writers Center, who is also the host of this event. So we are a literary arts nonprofit located in Bethesda, Maryland, and now virtually in all of your computers. We host about 300-ish workshops a year. Our new season will start in September with all virtual workshops. Hopefully Zach is putting some links in here as I'm just going through this. And we also host dozens of events like this one that are free to the public. If you've missed any of our old craft chats, we have them archived on our website. You can check them all out. They're super interesting, super fun, and just one of the best ways that I've been finding to spend my time is to just come to these craft chats and learn a little bit and get to nerd out a little bit about writing. I would also not be doing my job if I didn't also give you guys some information about our scholarship program. Amy Freeman, who's giving the thumbs up, is our development director. So this is one of her big passion projects. But we have a pretty robust scholarship program to offer workshops to people who cannot afford our workshops right now. And Zach is putting the information in the chat on the ways that you can donate to that. We know the pandemic has hit everyone pretty hard economically, and we want to make sure that we can continue our mission of supporting writers and anyone who wants to write. So we take donations online at our website, writer.org. We also have Venmo at writers-center, and PayPal info@writer.org. And those links are in the chat there. So if you have any money burning a hole in your pocket, feel free to throw it at us. We will gladly take it for our scholarships. You're welcome, Amy. And now I guess we'll just kind of get right into it. Again, if you're just kind of hopping on, you're joining the Craft Happy Hour with Jessica Q. Stark, author of Savage Pageant from Birds LLC, a collection that I am just obsessed with. So I'll just have Jessica maybe introduce yourself to everyone, tell us a little bit about the book, and maybe read a poem or 2 to get us started.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks everyone for listening. So Savage Pageant came out in March, and I wrote it probably about 2 years ago, and it's what they call a hybrid text. So it has poetry, and then it also has genealogies that are sort of prose, but also poetic in a sense as well. And it has illustrations that I've done, and it also has just sort of material, internet-derived material as well. So here's like an example of an illustration. I guess to put it in a summary, it's in some ways it's largely about, or it's at least focused on a place that once was in Southern California called Jungle Land, which up until its closure in 1969 housed Hollywood's celebrity animals. So, Leo, the MGM lion, Bonzo the chimpanzee, which of course there's like several animals that played these brands over the years. They were mostly housed in this place called Jungle Land, which had a lot of different other names and different iterations and different monikers as it developed in the early 20th century. It also kind of became this receptacle for Hollywood gossip, and I became quite obsessed with it just in thinking about land ownership, but also American entrepreneurism, and particularly I got very wrapped up in the idea of spectacle and different forms of stages. I grew up very close to the site of this place, although of course it was long gone. But I had, received some snippets and rumors about it. So I kind of took a deep dive in thinking about this book. But to say it's only about that is very reductive in my mind. I was writing it during my pregnancy with my son, who's now 3. I wrote it exclusively during that time, sort of in terror, because it was my first child, and you get all this advice when you're pregnant, and most of it is useless or whatever, and everyone just kept saying like, oh, you better like get everything done before, like I felt like I was gonna die or something, like they're like, you gotta get everything done. So I was really writing against the clock, and so it was a culmination of those two things and thinking about spectacle. I was also teaching creative writing at Duke at the time. I was pregnant until probably about 3 weeks before I gave birth, and I had a couple of students that took both of the classes for 2 semesters, and was the recipient of a lot of like well-meaning comments about my body and my size, and just the spectacle of pregnancy is a lot to bear at times too. So I very much let that bleed into this collection. But in short, that's kind of my summary of it. I guess that wasn't very short, but yeah, was there another question?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great summary because like you said, it is so many things in this book. You can't really just reduce it to being about one thing, which is part of what's so exciting about it. But I was wondering if you could read maybe 1 poem or 2 poems to give everyone a little bit of a sense of what,
Sure.
what you're doing.
I'll read from the latter portion of the book, and I'll read from one genealogy, and then I'll jump to a poem, maybe 2. 1963. You know what? I'm not going to do that one. Sorry. Bear with me. 1940. Let's go back in time. On July 8th, a barn catches fire and, fueled by the Santa Ana winds, spreads through Goebel's Wild Animal Farm, which is the former name of Jungleland. Beauty and magnitude cause spores to swell. In a panic from the burns, an elephant runs and breaks the property's main water line, making it difficult to contain and extinguish the fire. The cause of fire was reported as a result of spontaneous combustion. And this poem is called Savage Pageant 33 Weeks, and it's dedicated to the panther that escaped Jungleland. There's kind of a funny story about this panther because it escaped, and it was the only animal that was never recovered. And for about 10 years, local newspapers in Southern California would report on like sightings of this panther, like it would show up in like gas stations and stuff like that. So this is dedicated to that panther. Labor, noun. 1, productive activity, especially for the sake of economic gain. 2, the body of persons engaged in such activity, especially those working for wages. 3, this body of persons considered as a class, distinguished from management and capital. Last week, I felt your hiccups for 3 days straight. This week, unknown. A collection of impulses, this savage page. I pay to sit with a circle of strangers to feel more prepared, and one woman cries. I feel my eyes roll and I curl into another language. I am obsessed with hiding my own nakedness. The body on display, a public domain of choices made, a needle, a drink of sugar, the sun going down when I rise. Is it madness to have you? Elephants breaking the main water line. There are things I'd like to tell you before you are born, like don't ever sit in circles with strangers, like you don't always have to be in motion to survive, like the human heart is capable of making the head feel very small. And the last tissue I'll give you before giving you away to the clock and the stars is a simple one. Already you are part of the air, and this end will not summarize forever. Stay static for a time. Hold on to the slippery pool of hearsay, rumor, these legends. Even if they are stones, they are made of sand. And even if you can't jump ship, you might not need to find your way home. And I'll do one more. I don't think I've ever read this one out loud. Which is why I can't find it. Bear with me. Okay. There are many types of cannibals, and this is in the latter portion of the book, which is titled The Illness, which loosens the reins, so to speak, a little bit. And I guess in some ways it was a way to grapple with unseen and seen, unknown and known repercussions for an accumulative history of violence. There are many types of cannibals. Hatch a plan, break a windshield, find the culprit, a change in climate, bad water, more bad water, traffic. An imaginary sniper breaking glass while dogs sleep. Low-flying military crafts making better news than the misread routine and the usual percentage of broken glass. A ghost is a felt miscalculation in the overflow of human information and category. Reserve a space for the crack. Look through perfect symmetry for some bright triangle in misty air. If you don't think of the car or the dogs or the water, you might miss not knowing. There is no one out in the streets. Now look again. Thanks.
Yay! Thank you so much for reading those. I'm so excited to kind of dive in and talk about the collection. And yes, like Zach said in the chat, please buy the book. You can get it directly from Birds, their website, and they ship very quickly because I've purchased it for friends and it's come like the next day, so I could turn around and mail it. So definitely buy it from them there. All right, so where to jump in? I think that reading has given us a lot of different entry points into the conversation, but I kind of wanted to go back to when you were describing how you kind of fell into the subject matter of Jungle Land and then kind of branched out. And you mentioned that it started with an obsession. And I think as poets, we always kind of like grab onto something that we're obsessed with, and then that becomes a nice framework for the work. So I wondered if you could just talk about that process for you, how those different levels of research came about and became this collection.
Sure. Yeah. I'm also so interested in that word obsession, right? Like, I feel that it sometimes gets a really bad rap. Like there's always like a negative connotation of being obsessed by something. And I feel like there's some sort of gendered purchase to that as well. But I can't quite wrap my head around that. Just to say that I think the word obsessed is really key for this book. I don't recall how I came across this place, Jungle Land, or like when precisely I really started doing a deep dive. But like I said, I had been researching it probably for about 2 years before I actually started writing about it. And, I was doing my PhD in English, and research is just like, I love it, like I just love doing deep dives into random things. And it became kind of like a respite from my, other research for, writing literary critical stuff. And like I said, I wrote the majority, probably about 98% of it during that pregnancy with my son, Adrian. And I was just thinking a lot about the zoo, you know, the space, the violence attached to it, the violence attached to the people that owned it, that owned the land, and what was sort of what I also couldn't really. I became very obsessed with like what I couldn't find. There's one book about it, but it's kind of more of a like a coffee table homage thing, and there's amazing photographs, but a lot of the history is very slippery of this place. And it's a lot of what I pulled from were these kind of ridiculous like internet forums, kind of like fan internet forums of people basically just sharing memories, and you don't really know if they're, you know, accurate, or some of them are absurd and likely not, and very obviously not. But I became kind of, you know, really interested in thinking about this place that was so slippery and yet has so much violence attached to it. And again, I while I was writing it, I felt very much like I was becoming a spectacle myself in terms of, you know, having a very pregnant body in front of students, in front of colleagues. You know, to be a pregnant person in academia after the Trump election, you know, financially precarious, professionally precarious. I almost was like having the gall to bring a child into this world that felt like very much a spectacle. So I was writing these like, you know, poems about my experience with being pregnant, and I felt it very separate, but then they were just bleeding into one another. So I decided to entertain those two things together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, you have that whole poem in here that is kind of built of those found almost histories online of people's comments, and almost in like a Yelp review way. And some of it feels very grounded in the real, and then others you're like, well, is this what's really happening here? But when you put them all in the same playing field, you get maybe a fuller picture. And I think a lot of this collection, I was tracing kind of repetitive words or images throughout, and I saw a lot of ghosts and memory and rumor, and even things like illusion and what's unseen or what's unknown. And so I wonder what that kind of power gave to you as the writer to kind of fill in those gaps, or what you saw as the opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, as much as like I had the impulse to have structures that are cohesive or a narrative that makes sense. I mean, a large part of this book is really resisting completely filling in a void of information. And I feel like I really wanted to preserve the messiness, the disasters that are tied to this place, the uncertainty with what actually took place. You know, I'm so interested in how gossip both shapes truth, but, you know, completely and always distorts it. So, I mean, I could only write a poetry book. I feel that if, you know, if you were to try to write about like a cinema film script or something about this place, which you could do very easily, there would have to be some sort of violent reduction because this container was so leaky. So I really wanted to preserve that in that way, and which is why it's pulling together so many sort of disparate strands that, you know, in my mind was emulating this kind of, I'm interested in this thing and I'm getting flashes of, you know, information here that connect to this. But at the same time, like I wanted to make those connections apparent for the reader if you're, you know, really paying attention, but I also didn't want to be didactic in terms of my my own narrative rendition.
Yeah. And there's a way that all this information is presented in one part of the book, and then it kind of resurfaces in another part in almost like a reframing or a recontextualization of what had happened, that is just so exciting. I think, you know, maybe you don't catch it on your first read through, but then the second read through, you like, wait, that, you know, we already got a piece of that information here, and now it's being given to us in another poem in a different context, or from a different perspective, which is definitely exciting.
Right.
I wanted to talk about the drawings as well, because they're your drawings, correct?
Right.
And then there's obviously your writing in the poems, and then there's some kind of Google Maps images.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really drawn to the quote that began the Act 3 of the book that says, "The spectacle is not a collection of images, but a social relation among people mediated by images." And I think that really kind of brought together the fact that there's the images in the poems, and then there's the actual images offered by the various forms in the book. So I wonder if you could talk about the role of those drawings in your creative process, and also their function in the book as well.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it was the decision to make it a hybrid text, or to really go there in terms of an illustration, was very much a risk. Like, if you submit a manuscript, you know, I think people are warming up to it, but there's a good amount of contests and things that just completely strike out. If there's any visual material whatsoever, it's just, they don't accept it, or they won't read it. So that was very much a risk, but I felt like it was so worth it, in that, I mean, myself, I've been so influenced by thinking about poetry and comics and illustrated materials in the same breath. Like, I wrote my whole PhD dissertation on like the ways in which those mediums just cross with one another and cross-pollinate. And I was very interested in my PhD in thinking about this period of the 1960s where poets were doing a lot of weird kind of unofficial publications with the advent of mimeograph technology and kind of easier, cheaper ways of printing. And, you know, there's also a lot of poets that just have used illustrated materials, or at least visual materials, in their work. Teresa Ha-Kyung Cha's dictée was like, it's just always like my, so one of my earliest influences. I read it, you know, more than a decade ago when I was an undergrad. And it just struck me as being such a document, such a parchment, such a lifting off of the page. And Joe Brainerd as well. I loved the ways in which he could be so funny and serious at the same time, which I feel like is like the human condition, right? Mm-hmm. And when I was growing up, I was really, really enamored with those very boring Archie comics. Like, I'm still fascinated by like why I loved reading these incredibly horrible, boring Archie comics. And, you know, collage poetics too has had a huge influence on me, as well as a number of female comics artists, Linda Berry. So I knew I really wanted to work with this in that way. And I guess the illustrations specifically in Savage Pageant, I mean, they were, and I discussed this with an editor who was like, "Do you really want to keep these in?" And I was like, yes, very much so, just because they were so important to me in terms of establishing, you know, again, this is an account of a place, and I've pulled these research strands together, but it's still, you know, all of this information is so slippery. This is a personal account of a place that is admittedly speculative and untrue, and inherently sort of tethered to my own hand, to my own like illustrative, subjective line, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I loved the first time I encountered the illustration. I was like, okay, now this is providing just another way of seeing the material, or seeing what could happen there. I mean, I'm thinking about this one that is on the opposite side of the first White House screening, which is about Birth of a Nation, which was filmed there. So there's obviously these racist implications of that film, and then that's tied into the history of the location, and then even more tied into the the animals there, the captive animals, the violence to the animals, or the violence that the animals enact on the visitors there. So it kind of just all circles and wraps everything up together for me, which is just such an interesting reading experience.
Thanks.
I loved just the different layers too that you get throughout the poems. And like we said before, it's not just about one thing, and it's not just about one location, but there's poems about the radioactive elements that are leaking into the ground, and the kind of repercussions that weren't known from that, and how like you said before, the repercussions of the violence that are not known until you kind of start taking these histories and kind of building this archive. So I wanted to ask you just about the act of kind of pulling all of this information together into its own sort of archive, and how you see that functioning in not just a creative process way or a craft way, but also as a way to highlight the different subjects like the racism and the violence, and even the colonialism and the spectacle and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel, of course, like without even intention, poetry is such a political act. And for me, it was important to create a document that pays attention, not only to these kind of bigger things like, this nuclear meltdown that happened near where I grew up, which, is so immense, but to also try to hold that with these like smaller violent acts, like having Woodrow Wilson on the highest denomination of US currency, and what those implications are, and to sort of invite a reglance at so many aspects of daily life that we sort of take for granted. So, I mean, to answer your question, I feel that, again, I want to resist feeling didactic or something, because I obviously don't have any answers. But I mean, I just feel like it's a political act to pay attention these days when it's so easy not to. And that's sort of like the base impetus behind this. And to also just, to connect some dots. I mean, this meltdown happened, again, very close to where I grew up. I grew up drinking the tap. All of my friends drank the tap, and three kids in my high school had cancer before the age of 16. And it's like, but that still is something that's not really in the forefront of anyone's minds, although it's just so obviously related. And I feel like there's a lot of aspects of daily life that could use a little more attention.
Yeah. And I think especially in the genealogy prose poem sections that are kind of, moving through history at different points in the book, each segment isn't necessarily related, but their closeness and their kind of correlation implies a sense of causation, or kind of starts, the webs kind of connecting. And I think that the way that the book is laid out is very intentional, and kind of leading the reader to see those connections. And So I wanted to talk about the structure of the book itself, and it's kind of set up in those acts with the intermissions that are reminiscent of maybe like a circus performance, which also ties into the idea of spectacle and, what you saw as, the function of those divisions and how you kind of laid those out as you were crafting the project to submit it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell from the book, but I really love messing with different and engaging with different types of structures. Like there's just all these like accumulative structures in the book. And I'm drawn to structures because, like every structure that we can think about is an argument in itself, right? Like the way a building is designed is an argument for, what we prioritize or how we move in space. So like that, like a book structure certainly implies how we assume a reader wants to organize information. But I very much really wanted to think about history, especially like, US American history, in ways that highlight how we present again and again these sort of linear chronologies of national history, but of personal history too, right? Like, tracking like a pregnancy on Instagram or something that I was like guilty of. I'm not a saint. But that these linear chronologies that we keep affixing to history really perform, or presume this idea of progress and satisfaction when there's just so many different cracks in that challenge that idea of linearity. So I knew I wanted to present these sort of genealogies in the way that I wanted to sort of limit my frame of attention to this place, but also kind of challenge the structure of the building, challenge the structure of the genealogy, challenge the structure of how we tell a history of a place, how we tell a history of a pregnancy. And yeah, I mean, I wanted to, I knew I wanted to make chapters or acts that sort of follow, because, this book in a lot of ways is a performance as well. I can't get away from the spectacle of myself as a poet, as I sit here in my very dirty office, like talking to you all. I am a spectacle as well. And I very much wanted to frame that in terms of how I encountered this place. And, again, it's kind of leading to this last chapter called The Illness, which is again, it's like a loosening. It's a loosening of reason, of linearity. I'm trying to push against the edges that sort of contain us into these so-called tidy containers.
Yeah, I'm gonna pop into the chat because I think we have some questions now from Margaret. Do you have another book in the works?
I do.
That might be a loaded question.
Yeah, I totally do. It's called Buffalo Girl, and it's called Buffalo Girl, and I'm well in it, and it deals a lot with my mother, who and her memories and who she was before she immigrated here. She is originally from South Vietnam, and it revises a lot of different iterations of Little Red Riding Hood.
Okay. That's exciting. We can't wait to read it. No pressure to finish and get it out there, but no, that sounds exciting. And it sounds like a little bit of this project dealing with histories and memories.
Yeah,
and
can't get away from that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no, that's great. All right, so from Ron, what are your top 5 favorite comics and why? And then a follow-up, could you say a little bit more about the intersection of comics and poetry?
Oh man, I feel like I have like PTSD from my dissertation defense. Top 5 comics, that's hard. So my scholarly stuff really attended to, I love single author comics. I think they're brilliant. But I was really, a lot of the kind of like comic scholarship that's hip in academia was focused on these sort of single author comics. So people like Alison Bechdel or Daniel Klaus. But I was really interested, and again, I think I'm really drawn to boring comics. And that's maybe like a form of masochism or something. But I was really interested in, and I shouldn't say boring, that's a very reductive word, but I was really interested in really sprawling, long comic strips that were very kind of like long publishing. So Dick Tracy, I wrote about Dick Tracy, I wrote about Crazy Cat, I wrote about Nancy, and thinking about the ways that these comics that may have started with a moral impetus or some sort of plan in their original design, how they really kind of reshape and transform and metamorphose into these monstrous manifestations of themselves, and monstrous in a not a negative connotation, but and the radical possibility of these ongoing permutations of the same figure. I just find that just so fascinating. Yeah, yeah. I don't know if that was 5. I don't
Close
know.
enough. Close enough.
I love the work of Julie Doucette. In terms of single author, I love the work of Julie Doucette. But again, I feel like there's a lot of boredom involved with those comics too. Like she writes a lot about stuff that, you know, nothing exceptional happens, or days that nothing exceptional happens. I just find that so fascinating, like putting an image to that and how much that is a part of all of our existence, and yet we resist that or something.
Yeah. And do you have anything more to say about kind of the intersection of comics and poetry?
Oh. Yeah. So in my dissertation, I was looking specifically at a lot of kind of long, biggish poems. So thinking about the ways in which, you know, both of these authors think about how to use white space, but also how to break the format. And, you know, in comics, there's just so much interesting mirroring of breaking down language or just like messing with it that I just found really fascinating and parallel to, I guess this was just a sort of guilty pleasure in really like going deep into like, why do I keep coming back to poems and also comics? I was like, there has to be a way that they sort of overlap. And in my mind, they really do interesting experimental thinking about, you know, language, space, image. So.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really interested now in kind of seeking out those comics, and I'm sure some of our listeners are too, and kind of drawing those connections as well. So that'll be really fun to explore post chat. Ellen is saying, how much of your work is more of an idea that comes to you while you're embedded in your theme, and how much is something that you thought should be included, so you set out to write that? So I guess this is a question of intention, maybe when you're sitting down to write a poem or a part of the project.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I for myself, I am so easily distracted that I guess probably within the last 5 years, I have 2 modalities. I have an ongoing project called Internet, which is like a little zine that I print myself, and it's, you know, up to like volume 8 or something. I think I packed it away, so I would show you, but and it's basically like an ongoing love poem to the internet. And in terms of that, that's like where I refer to that as like my B-side. And I'll like, if I like sell a book to somebody, sometimes I'll just throw it in with the book. But it's, you know, largely unedited. It's I write it all on my phone, like on a notes app that's not fancy at all. And I usually write it right before I go to bed instead of like scrolling Twitter or something. Um, and in that sense, like that's kind of where I put all of my like disorganized information, and it's just like a good way to sort of write always, like in, you know, when we could in like a doctor's office or something like that, or, you know, in stolen moments. However, for the books, I'm very pointed about writing towards that thing. And I feel that once I get locked into an idea, especially like with Savage Pageant, it was this idea of spectacle. It was this specific place. And right now it's my mother, which is like, God help me. She's a wonderful woman, but she's very complicated. And it's a lot more of a personal place for me, but I'm locked into it and I can't not like keep writing about that thing. And that was not always how it was. But when I was like kind of just, you know, starting out, I'd write like a poem here and there, but now I'm very, I don't know, for better or for worse, I get really wrapped up in an idea and I want to write towards it. I want to write around it.
Yeah, I love the idea of that kind of project being like a B-side. I saw something on, I think Twitter, someone was saying they should, you know, publish collections of the poems that actually didn't make it into people's collections. And that seems almost like a similar kind of project to maybe what you're doing, though yours has a more pointed subject and aim and stuff like that. But that's great. Not everything has to be the big project.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I write a lot of crap too, you know, just like total detritus.
I chuckle because it's all too real, especially now, you know, it's hard totally to put the pressure on and.
Right. Oh yeah, I mean, to be honest, I haven't been writing as quickly or reading. I usually read quite a bit, and since March, I really have been quite slow. Yeah.
All right. Lots of questions in the chat. So question about your process as it relates to research. Wondering if you're inspired to write poems as you're researching, or if you decide to do the research and then write the poem when you've kind of compiled all the information.
I mean, I feel like research for me is so much a part of, like, there's so much poetry in research, you know, like when I was writing Savage Pageant, I was reading Guy Debord, Society of the Spectacle, and Gaston Bachelard, Poetics of Space. And I mean, it's just like pure poetry, you know? And I mean, I guess I usually maybe will research first and then write around or write into that research. But for me, it's so much, especially with the books. I mean, the zine and the chapbooks, I really kind of let it all hang out. But I'm quite more focused in terms of the book, in terms of like, I mean, this is a symptom of being in graduate school for way too long, but and I'm done, thank God. But like research is like my being, you know, like research is everything. It was with me eating breakfast and in my dreams, unfortunately. So for me, I can't unfortunately separate those two things. It's become symptomatic of my creative process.
And Bob is wondering if you've met Tippi Hedren. I think there's a lot of kind of old Hollywood figures in here too, but it's an interesting question.
I haven't. Bob, have you? Okay.
No.
Oh, no.
If anyone on the chat has met Tippy, let us know.
I would love that.
You just mentioned your chapbook, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about publishing in different forms, you know, the collection and then the chapbooks and the zine, and how you kind of navigate those different projects.
Yeah, the chapbooks, again, they're like a little more, I mean, I shouldn't say they're like more free form. I'm just like a little gentler on myself with those. And I think all of my chapbooks I've written on my cell phone. And my chapbook with Ethel Zine Press, which is an amazing press that kind of like hand sews their books. I really recommend checking them out. I'll put them in the chat. They published my chapbook called Vasilisa the Wise, and it's amazing. This Sarah Lefsick does like a hand sews all of these issues, and they're limited edition. But it's like when you receive it, it's like a living object, you know, like it's not built for permanence, which I just find so rare, I guess, that, you know, you make this book and you think it's going to last forever or something. These are very much, they have an expiration date, I think. Anyways, all to say, I wrote that little mini chap, the small one, while I was like walking my son who was sleeping. He has this, you know, very usual problem, especially when he was a baby, of like only being able to sleep while he was in motion. So I was like pushing the stroller in the park, and I wrote that like on my phone with the other hand. I kind of like, I think I'm drawn to like, you know, again, these structures of arbitrary like panic. Like I love a self-imposed deadline. I'm like learning a lot about myself in this interview, so thank you. But yeah, I think I kind of like putting a strange, like, you know, impossible or just like non-existent pressure on myself to produce something, because I feel like as a mom, you just kind of have to, you have to be constantly stealing moments. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's been interesting to see how chapbooks have gone from relatively unknown to being just like a different type of project and a different form of presenting work in its own sort of art object.
Yeah, I meant to address that part of your question too, in that, you know, the formulation of Internet, which is like this ongoing thing that I just print myself very cheaply. I mean, I really wanted to produce it because of the slog of publishing. I mean, generally it's like you get a poem published and then you like see it 8 months later, you know, and you're like, whoa, I was in like a totally different headspace, and I don't even know if I like that poem anymore, but I guess here's this magazine that I'm in, you know, grateful, but like also I just wanted to rattle stuff off and be, you know, like go to readings and be like, hey, like check out this like ridiculous thing I just made. And it's imperfect, and I kind of wanted that. I sought that out.
Yeah, I think that type of imperfection too is really, it's nice for writers of all stages to see that not everything is stagnant, or not everything, even once something's published, it can change and it has a different life. So all right, one more question in the chat about hybrid texts. So how is the creative process different for poetry and other forms of writing for you? Do you feel that it comes from the same place creatively?
That's a good question. Thank you, Daniel. I feel that, well, when I first began writing, which was about like 15 years ago or so, I began writing fiction, and I was writing under a pseudonym, and it was like humor writing. And I had like 3 or 4 publications, but they're really, really terrible. And I'm so glad that I used a pseudonym, but
we need to know. We need to
no way. No way. And I think it was totally different. It was totally different because I felt like when I first started writing in that way, I was so afraid and I was so fearful. I mean, I wrote a poem about this actually. This is one of my first poems I wrote was about the first poem I actually wrote, which was in fourth grade, which was just my fourth grade teacher, you know, assigned us to write a poem without really any prompt or anything. And I was so scared, like terrified to mess up or like to write a bad poem that I just literally stole William Wordsworth's Daffodils. Like that super famous poem, and I just like turned it in because I was so terrified. And of course the teacher knew and was like, oh, actually you hear me? I think
Yep, there you go.
Sorry.
You're back.
Okay, am I
No, you're
good?
good. Yeah.
Okay, where did I cut off?
The teacher caught your plagiarism.
So the teacher was like, this is an insanely famous poem. You're totally busted. And then like I was supposed to see her after class and then I just never did. But I was such a nerdy like good student that like it just was never mentioned again. But all to say that I feel like when I began writing fiction, it was still very much in that way of like I was scared to write poetry and I was just kind of scared. And I was hiding a lot. And I feel like I've arrived at a place with my work where I don't feel that way anymore. And I'm not sure what really provoked that severe change, but it's something that I'm much more comfortable with now.
Yeah, that's great. What a great answer. And a great warning to everyone not to plagiarize, not to be afraid. Don't be afraid to write poetry. I think so much of what we encounter at those ages in school, it does make it seem so scary and official and mysterious and, kind of chipping away at those rules and finding what gives you that freedom is really nice as you grow as a writer. So we're just about 3 minutes left. The time is flying by. So I just wanted to squeeze in a question. If you have any writing books or craft advice that you turn to a lot, anything that you can recommend to writers and readers about kind of diving into the world of poetry?
I don't. I don't, and I don't mean that in like a snobby way. I'm constantly trying to, and I've read a lot of, because I teach creative writing and I have for years now. And I have read a lot of craft books and I've tried to read several, but again, for me, it's either reading other people's poems, which, I do constantly, or at least less now, but I try to. Those are my manuals, like finding a conversation in which I really want to be a part of. That's my craft manual. Like that's the stakes for me. And again, for me, literary theory has been such a craft manual in some ways for me. I mentioned Guy Debord and Bachelard, but there's just so much else out there that for me sparks just so much, but, for me, like, I just feel like poets find their manuals everywhere, right? Like trees, other texts, alchemy, animals, dreams. It's like in the air,
Yeah. Well, that's great.
If you find a good craft manual, please let me know because I'm desperate for one.
Well, so many of those, they recycle the same kind of mantras and the same information. But I do think what you said about reading is something that we've heard across all of these craft chats is like the number one: read widely and find where you want to be in that conversation with the other poets. I think poetry is such a conversation that's built upon, you know, everything that came before and everything that comes after. So that's really important. Well, thank you so much for chatting and, you know, just going through everything. I'm so excited for everyone to go buy your book, learn more about Jungle Land and all of these complexities that you layer in here. This has been really, really fun chat. And yes, Amy always has the suggestion, write reviews if you read the book and love the book. Reviews are so important for people who are looking for reading material and for the authors. And so thank you guys so much for listening. Zach is throwing all the links where you can get everything done in here. And thank you, Jessica, for making some time.
Thank you for your wonderful questions, and thank you everyone for listening. I appreciate you.